Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second webinar in our disaster webinar series. Today, we're going to hear about consumer protection and disasters with Laura Boeckman. Laura is the North Florida Consumer Protection Bureau Chief for the Florida Attorney General's Office in Jacksonville. I'm Kathy Grunwald, the Disaster Coordinator Attorney here at Legal Services in North Florida, and I'm here today with Carlin Selders, our Disaster Program Assistant. We'll get started after we have 4 housekeeping details. If you have questions, please type them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen in the dashboard. We'll answer the questions during the webinar and at the end of the webinar, time permitting. The webinar is being recorded, and I'll send a link to that recording, the PowerPoint, and the CLE, Florida CLE information after the webinar. Also, at the end of the webinar, you'll be asked to do a brief SurveyMonkey survey to evaluate the webinar. So I'd appreciate it if you do that and give us any feedback you want. Finally, I want to thank you for joining today, and I encourage you to return every Thursday at noon through November 19th for this webinar series. And so with that, I'm going to pivot over to Laura Boeckman. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you to Kathy and Carlin. They have undergone Herculean efforts to make sure that hopefully this webinar is technology disaster free. So many, many thanks for the many practices, and hopefully this will go by seamlessly. So let's go ahead and get started. There we go. All right, so I thought I would just start with the general overview of the Attorney General's Office if you're not familiar with what we do. So obviously one of our divisions is consumer protection, and that's the division that I'm in. But we also do statewide prosecution. So that's any crime that covers more than one circuit. So human trafficking, drugs, things that tend to travel throughout the state or cross circuit lines. Our statewide prosecution unit handles that. We also do Medicaid fraud. So if there's doctors who are billing for services that weren't performed or supplies that weren't needed, our Medicaid fraud unit, nursing home abuse, they work on stuff like that. Probably the biggest unit in our office is the General Civil Division. And so as the attorney for the state of Florida, so we represent the other agencies within the state of Florida. So our General Civil Division will represent whenever an agency has litigation or other legal matters where they need representation, that's our General Civil Division will do that. And then within our Consumer Protection Division, we are essentially divided up into 3 bureaus throughout the state. So in North Florida, we've got offices in Tallahassee and Jacksonville. In Central Florida, we have offices in Tampa and Orlando. And in South Florida, we have West Palm Beach, Fort Lauderdale, and Miami. So no matter where you are in the state, I'm happy to put you in touch with whoever the bureau chief might be for those respective offices if you have any questions or need any assistance in the future. So the Consumer Protection Division, we are essentially charged with enforcing the Deceptive and Unfair Trade Practices Act. So it's found in Section 501 of the Florida statutes. And essentially, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but anything that's deceptive or unfair are things that we can go after. And so there's not enough time to talk about all the different types of cases that we do, but I've listed here just some of the general ones. So any type of issue dealing with contractors. So if a consumer hired somebody to install a pool and they came out and dug a hole and then left and kept the money and didn't finish it, that would be unfair and deceptive. Same thing with roof or any other sort of construction or any other services that a contractor may provide. A lot of our cases deal with issues on the internet, advertisements, pop-ups, robocalls, tech scams where people are taking your computer hostage and then charging you money to be able to release the computer back to you or control the computer back to you. A lot of just online deceptive advertising, getting people to sign up for something and then they're not able to unsubscribe from it. They're continuing to get billed for it every month and having difficulty not having that charge on their credit card every month. We've done several travel cases. Florida, understandably, a lot of people come here to retire and to travel. And so we've had several travel companies who've promised deep, deep discounts on travel if you pay a large sum up front, and then those discounts are never realized. Car dealerships can engage in unfair and deceptive trade practices. We've also seen a lot of mortgage fraud, especially with the recession about 10 years ago. There was definitely a lot of mortgage fraud that came out of that, but it still happens today. And another type of case that we see are just deceptive solicitations. Solicitations that look like they're from a government entity or from some other business that you would normally do business with, but they are not actually with that business, and they're trying to trick people into signing up for things that they may not actually want or need or understand. And then there's hundreds of other types of cases that we do, but I think that's kind of a good just overview of some of probably the most common types of cases that we deal with. So in the disaster context, one of the things that our unit is charged with is enforcing Florida's price gouging law. And so this would come into play in any type of disaster. I think most often we think of it in terms of hurricanes, which is certainly one instance where there's a state of emergency. But I've also listed here some other experiences where unfortunately we've had to get involved as well, because they are disasters. If there's a school shooting, the Pulse nightclub event, oil spills, hurricanes, and now pandemics as well. All of these raise consumer protection issues, and so we will talk about some of those. So you can find the price gouging statute at 501.160. There's a couple of really important things to understand about price gouging. First of all, for the price gouging statute to be in effect, there has to be a declared state of emergency. So when there's not a state of emergency and a hotel triples their price because there's a home football weekend, that's not price gouging, that's called capitalism. So people may not like it and they may get upset that they have to pay more or pay a premium for something that's in high demand. But if there's no state of emergency, it's not necessarily illegal, or at least it doesn't violate the price gouging statute. And so speaking of state of emergencies, Carlene, can we go ahead with our first poll? I wanted to see if you knew how many states of emergency are currently in effect in the state of Florida. So we'll give you a minute to choose your options. We'll see how well versed you are with states of emergency in Florida. All right, Carlene, did we get a good response? So the most popular answer is 2, but there are actually 3 states of emergency in Florida right now. So Hurricane Michael, we are still under a state of emergency for Hurricane Michael, which happened over 2 years ago. We're almost right past the 2-year date. Hurricane Sally, which just hit a few weeks ago. So the Panhandle area, I think there's about 6 or 7 counties that are still under a state of emergency for Hurricane Sally. And then coronavirus. We are still under a state of emergency for coronavirus. And so states with those states of emergency, then we look at what is an essential commodity. What has the governor declared an essential commodity? Well, the governor doesn't declare what state of an essential commodity. We determine what consists of an essential commodity. So, and we will look most specifically at hurricanes because that's what we tend to see the most when price gouging happens. But the essential commodities are going to vary depending on the emergency. So the essential commodities for a hurricane are very different from the essential commodities for COVID. So for COVID, essential commodities are things like hand sanitizer, cleaning products, masks, booties, gowns, things like that. For a hurricane, it's going to be water, ice, gas, housing. Those are the things that tend to be essential during those types of states of emergency. And when we're determining whether something constitutes price gouging, we are looking at there's 2 different ways we can identify price gouging. One is that we look at what price was the business charging in the 30 days before the state of emergency. So if a roofer was charging $1 per square foot for tarp in the 30 days before the state of emergency, but then when the state of emergency hit, the price increased to $2 a square foot, that's going to garner some additional attention, because why did your price increase if you were charging $1 per square foot for 30 days or more before the state of emergency? What caused the increase in price? We can also look at the market price. You know, what is generally the price that this product is charged for in the market? Because maybe the business didn't sell this product before the state of emergency. Maybe they brought it in just in response to the state of emergency to have this product for their customers. And we saw that a lot with COVID. So a lot of businesses did not carry masks before the COVID pandemic, and then started bringing them in, and they had never really priced them before. So we didn't really have the benefit of seeing what the 30-day price look back would have been. But we can look at the market price and, you know, what does this product normally go for in the market, and how far off are they from that price? One of the defenses to the price gouging statute is if their price increase is attributable to additional costs. So if a water remediation company comes in after a hurricane and they're based in South Florida and they've had to travel to the Panhandle, maybe they've had to hire additional crew. Maybe they've had to put that crew up in hotels. They're working overtime. They're working weekends. They had to rent extra cherry pickers to take trees down, and they had to bring those cherry pickers in from Georgia or from other places. So it's possible that they could have additional costs that would create the increase in price. And that's certainly something that we would look at and take into consideration. Now my slide does not want to advance. There we go. Okay, so here is a little clip that I thought I would show you. And this is a short news story that they did about one of our price gouging cases. Try to make sure you're still awake. Hopefully it plays.
2 of these price gouging complaints came from this gas station in West Palm Beach, the Chevron on North Dixie Highway. Here, premium gasoline costs $4.09 a gallon. That's the same price one man reported to the Florida Attorney General, claiming just 1 week ago, premium gas at other stations was just $2.79. We checked around and found premium gas at nearby stations for $3.09 and even $2.99, a full $1 cheaper than this Chevron. You the manager?
Yeah.
We're hoping to speak to somebody about your gas prices. We showed the manager these price gouging complaints. He says he did not raise prices ahead of the storm.
The price wasn't changed at all.
Why is gas here $4.09 when down the street we found it for $1 cheaper?
I don't know which place is $1 cheaper. Which place you are talking about?
The Valero, not far from here, it's $1 cheaper than your premium gas.
I don't know about that.
Well, that's what we found. We have photos of it. We have people complaining about price increases here. Is there anything you want to say about that? The manager, who would not give us his name, told us an investigator with the AG's office already stopped by. He says he showed that investigator documents to prove he was not price gouging, a claim the AG's office has yet to verify. Could you show us the same document you showed them?
No, I cannot, because I have to satisfy him, not you.
This is not the only complaint the AG's office is investigating. Between a tip line and a new no-scam app, the office received 2,400 reports of sudden price increases. Many allegations are about gas and water, like this store charging $9 for a case.
If, in fact, these essential commodities like food, water, gas, plywood, if it is not available because the prices are too high and people do not have access to those supplies, then they can't take the necessary precautions that we're urging them to take.
So far, investigators visited 150 Florida businesses, getting consumers refunds and price reductions. But in a tweet, Attorney General Moody says the same store that charged $9 for water agreed to lower the price one day, only to raise it back the next. Bad move, she says, as her office pursues the worst offenders. In West Palm Beach, Danielle Waugh, CBS 12 News investigates.
A couple things about this story. You'll notice that they said that one of our investigators had already been out there, and that's what we do. So when there's a declared state of emergency, we have a process where consumers can file complaints with our office, and they can do it by calling. They can go online and file a complaint, and then we also have an app where you can file the complaint there. And so I'm going to show you really quick our website so that you can see where to file a complaint online. So you'll see there's two different buttons here. There's the general complaints. So if it's not related to price gouging or a state of emergency, you can click that button to file a complaint. And then the bigger red button is the price gouging complaints. And so as long as there's a state of emergency in effect, that button will be available on our website. And then, people will have to select which state of emergency they're complaining about, whether it's a COVID issue, a Sally, or a Michael, but usually we can tell from the content if they get it in the wrong one, and that's fine. And so what our process is in our office is, as we get these complaints, they're assigned to investigators who look at them. If they are particularly concerning or egregious, typically the investigator will go and make a visit to the business. We'll call or we'll go visit. In times of COVID, we're not able to do as many in-person visits, but we want to make immediate contact. And we also have extensive contacts set up with different corporations. So if we start to see a pattern of complaints against a specific type of business, we can reach out to their corporate contact as well, and they can help us address the issue and make sure that everything is being priced the way it should be. So every complaint that gets filed gets attention as quickly as it possibly can, usually within a matter of hours or a matter of days, especially if we're in the time frame immediately leading up to the storm. So we typically see lots of complaints before the storm hits about gas, about water, food, and hotels, people who are evacuating and trying to find safe housing, and then gas and water are big sources of complaints as well. And so we try to act on those as quickly as we can, so that if a price has gone up unconscionably, we can address that quickly, get it back down to where it needs to be so that people have access to that product again. And then after a storm, the complaints we typically see post-storm are a lot of tree removal, contractors, water remediation, things that plywood. We tend to see generators both before and after the storm. It really can run the gamut, but the complaints that come in after the storm tend to kind of last for a longer period of time, because that's when we're in recovery. That's when people are trying to put their lives and their homes back together, depending on the severity of the storm, which is why we're still under a state of emergency. I think there's 11 counties in the Panhandle that are still under a state of emergency from Michael, because it was such a devastating storm and caused so much damage. People are still in the recovery phase and probably will be for quite some time. And so we're continuing to see complaints about water remediation, contractors. That's pretty much most of all of what we're seeing at this point. All right, I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. Oops, we already did that. Okay. So from a consumer protection standpoint, some of the issues that are common that we see after the disasters hit are assignments of benefits. And for those of you who may not be familiar with an assignment of benefit, it's a process where if a homeowner does not want to deal directly with their insurance company in trying to negotiate what insurance benefits they may be able to get. So say they need to repair their roof. They can assign their benefits to the roofer, who will then file the insurance claim and negotiate the insurance claim and everything. There's been a lot of abuse with assignments of benefits. A lot of consumers, we find, do not understand what an assignment of benefits is. They're just given a bunch of paperwork. The contractor will say things like, just sign this, I'll take care of everything, you don't need to worry about it. And they don't knowingly assign the benefits of their insurance policy to the roofer, because often if they need that roof repaired, that's probably not the only insurance benefit they're going to need. There might be some tree removal, there might be some water remediation. And so let's just say that the insurance policy that they have has $100,000 in benefits. And if the roofer comes in and takes $80,000 of that, and then they're only left with $20,000 to do the remainder of all these repairs to their home, they're probably not going to be able to do that. Whereas if the consumer is negotiating directly with the roofer and saying, not just how much can they get the insurance company to pay, but how much is the value of the work actually worth? What would it cost to actually repair the roof of this house? because the roofer is not necessarily going to have the consumer's best interests at heart. They're not necessarily going to be saying, gosh, how cheap can I do this job so that this consumer has lots of money left to do the other repairs that she might need to her house. So in light of a lot of the abuse that was happening with assignments of benefits post-Michael, there was a statutory change last year that limited the circumstances where you can have an assignment of benefits. So we're hopeful that this will cut down on some of the abuse that we're seeing. It is still possible to do an assignment of benefits, but it's more restricted now. So it should be a more involved and knowing process when the consumer does agree to an assignment of benefits. I personally think I've seen very few, if any, circumstances where the assignment of benefits actually benefited the consumer. So in my opinion, I think it's generally best to avoid doing assignments of benefits. And I forgot to say this at the beginning, but of course, all my comments here today are mine and mine alone and not of the Attorney General's. So I speak for myself, not for the office. We also see an increase in housing costs. We saw this, we're still seeing this in Michael with the Panhandle, where a significant portion of the housing industry was eliminated. I mean, the houses were just destroyed and leveled. So now you have a housing market that has significantly shrunk, which outside of a state of emergency is naturally going to drive the prices of housing up. So it gets complicated though when there's a state of emergency. I mean, maybe they can justify the increase in the housing if they had to do a special assessment to repair damage, like if it's a condominium association and the elevator got flooded, and so they had to replace the elevator and therefore had to do a special assessment or had to increase everyone's rent across the board to try to cover some of the expenses. Perhaps that would be okay. But it gets tricky. But we certainly had quite, and still have, quite a few complaints from people complaining about the increase in housing in the Panhandle after Michael. And that can happen after any state of emergency where a significant portion of the housing market has been eliminated, and then it's going to drive up prices. So we definitely are interested in hearing from people who are seeing significant increases in housing. You know, we do normally expect to see an increase in housing. I mean, most people's rent tends to go up, you know, 4 or 5% every year. So, you know, if we're seeing that kind of trend, it may not be as concerning. But if it's, you know, if rents are going up 30, 40%, that's especially concerning.
Laura,
We also, yes, ma'am.
I have a quick question. If the AG's office does get an assignment of benefits question, do you all refer them to a local legal aid program or to the insurance commissioner, or how do y'all handle that complaint if it comes into the office?
We would refer it to the Department of Insurance, which is part of the Department of Financial Services. So they are the ones who take a look at that. There's potentially an unfair and deceptive aspect to it as well. It's not price gouging because it's not an increase in price, but it could be unfair or deceptive. And so we may take a look at it from that angle as well. But typically the Department of Insurance handles the assignment of benefits issues.
Thank you.
I should have paused earlier. Any other questions and please feel free to ask questions as we go along. Okay. We see a lot of unlicensed contractors. Right after Hurricane Michael, we went to Mexico City for an outreach event and spoke to some consumers there who were using unlicensed contractors and knew that they were unlicensed and didn't care because they just needed the work done. And it was really interesting because there were, for those of you in the Panhandle, you might know this, but they actually had police, that no one was allowed into the area, like in Mexico City and in Panama City. They had the areas completely sealed off, and the police were controlling who could get in and out of the area as a method of protecting the homeowners that were there, because they didn't want this influx of unlicensed contractors and other people coming in and taking advantage of the citizens there while they were trying to just get their feet under them and figure out what was going on. So FEMA could come in, other agencies and things were allowed in, but they were not allowing in private individuals. But I'll tell you that some of them got in anyway, and they started going around, and people were desperate, and some of them didn't know to check to see whether they were licensed or not, and some just didn't care. They were just like, I need a tarp. I don't have the time to go out and research. And by the way, I don't actually have a house or the internet to be able to do this research. Like, you know, these are pretty desperate times. But even once they opened up the area to make it easier for people to come in and out, there's still a lot of unlicensed contractors. And we have quite a few cases that came out of, and we're still litigating, that came out of there. But certainly we can go after those contractors for unlicensed, for performing work when they are not licensed. It's tricky though, they tend to not have a lot of assets if they're out doing unlicensed contracting work. So certainly the better practice is to not use them in the first place. But the Department of Business and Professional Regulation also goes after unlicensed contractors, and it's also a crime to perform contracting work if you are not licensed in the state of Florida. So we have had state attorneys' offices go after some of the contractors for their unlicensed activity, especially in the Panhandle, where it really had a big impact on the people and their ability to recover. And so they're very interested in that criminal aspect of it. Even the licensed contractors, we have quite a few cases where people were complaining that even though the contractor was licensed, the work they were doing was substandard. Kathy, do we have another question?
Yeah, we do. The question is there a cause of action for increased housing costs? And they're asking if you can tell us about the fact patterns for any ongoing litigation against contractors that the AG's office is participating in. So really two questions, a cause of action for increased housing costs, and then fact patterns for ongoing litigation.
So we are still currently investigating the housing costs in the Panhandle. It is, from a legal perspective, it's a complicated issue because there's a lot of different factors that we have to look at to see what is causing the increase in the housing market. And the Panhandle is a unique situation where the devastation was so widespread and so intense that you have to find a comparable market to compare it to. And so we've actually retained an expert who's looking at this for us to help us figure out, okay, what is a comparable market to what the Panhandle was pre-storm, and then what are the factors that are affecting the cost post-storm. So there, we do not currently have any litigation that's pending against any particular housing complexes. We have issued investigative subpoenas to several complexes. We are actively reviewing documents and analyzing them to see what reasons they may have for some of the increases in pricing. And the contractors, you know, sorry, Kathy, was there another follow-up?
No, there is another comment, which is about contractors. It says there are a few people that the questioner asked that she said got a new roof placed on their homes after Hurricane Michael, who are now experiencing leaks and problems with the roofs, but they can't find the person because the business has closed or they were never from around here.
Yes, and unfortunately, that's what I was just getting ready to talk about. That is a big problem. We've seen a lot of contractors who came from out of state, who came from different parts of the state, who have since folded up, you know, showed up and did the work, and those are difficult cases because it's not necessarily unfair and deceptive. It may be, but it's very fact specific, and it really depends on what was the work that was done, what was the quality. If they were licensed, though, there is the opportunity, so you can file a complaint with the Department of Business and Professional Regulation, DBPR, and they do have a fund available for consumers who were injured by licensed contractors. But to be able to access that fund, you have to have a judgment against the contractor. So I know that's tough if you can't find them, but one of the things you can do is file a complaint with us. I mean, that's one of the things that we do. That's not price gouging necessarily, but we will look at it from an unfair and deceptive trade practices. And we have multiple cases that have come out of Michael in the Panhandle where contractors were promising one thing and doing another. They were over-promising. They weren't licensed to do the actual work they were doing. You know, like they might have had a roofing license, but they didn't have a license to do water remediation or some of the other services that they were offering. And so we have done quite a few of those where we've gotten in and And we do have some tools to be able to find people that aren't available to the general public. So we might have a little bit more luck locating them and locating any assets that they might have. So that's an option as well. And we're going to talk a little bit about, I have one slide just about kind of things to do to prevent these problems, right? Because they're always easier to deal with if you prevent them on the front end than trying to deal with them at the back end. But I know that's not always realistic when you're in the aftermath of a disaster and a hurricane. So these things are going to happen. And then tree removal. We do see a lot of complaints about tree removal. It's natural that you're going to have trees removed either on your property or on your home. And I will tell you that before I started doing this, I had no idea how much it costs to remove a tree. And now I have a pretty good idea, and it is a lot more expensive than I thought, especially if a tree is laying on the house. You know, that's especially tricky. So typically they're going to have to bring a cherry picker out to have to lift that tree off. And you know, it just so happened that when Hurricane Michael hit, it hit over a weekend, or hit just right before the weekend. So a lot of the contractors and tree removal people, they were charging overtime because they were working on a weekend. And that's going to be more expensive. And so there's also different expenses depending on whether they haul the debris away, whether they leave it there, they grind up the stump, do they leave the stump? There's a lot of different factors that go into it. But certainly we've also seen instances of price gouging where, again, for a comparable job, they were in the 30 days before the storm, they were charging one rate, and then that rate significantly increased. Maybe it's justifiable, maybe it's not, but that's exactly what we would take a look at.
Got one more question. Asking you to repeat the name of DBPR's fund for those impacted by contractors.
I do not know the exact name of the fund. I think it's the Victim Compensation Fund, but I am not sure. And if you will email me, I will look that up for you and find out for you. But certainly DBPR can help with that as well, but I'll double check. So these are just a series of pictures that when we went to Mexico Beach, this was about a month after Michael hit. We went down there and did an outreach event to help people, to kind of let them know what the resources were. The event was held at a tennis court at a local park. And so everybody all the different agencies came and set up their tables and offered assistance. And so before the event, I went around with one of our investigators, and these were some of the pictures that we took. And I'll tell you, you know, even the pictures I don't think fully do justice when you're just standing there and I'd never been to Mexico Beach before, so I can't tell you what it looked like before that, but I'm pretty sure that right on the waterfront, it was not just complete flat and sandy. So it was very eye-opening for me to just see the extent of the destruction and the drive heading down there for, about 60 miles once we got off of I-10, just seeing, a metal barn with no roof. And then 5 miles down the road, you see the roof of the barn on the side of the road. And the trees that are all just kind of bent at a 90-degree angle, because you can just see the direction that the wind was coming. It really hit home for me, just the extent of the devastation and just how overwhelming it had to have been for these people, all the different issues that they had to address. So many of them fled and then had to try to get back into the area and just start picking up the pieces. And we did. We saw people literally still combing through the debris of their homes, trying to salvage whatever they could. And I look at these pictures and I think, it doesn't even look real, but that's just how strong that storm was. And it's really just amazing.
And Laura, one of our viewers said the name of that fund is the Construction Recovery Fund.
That sounds right. Thank you very much. Yes, the Construction Recovery Fund. And it's not limited just to hurricanes. I mean, anytime that a licensed contractor, if a consumer gets a judgment against them, my understanding is you can access that fund. So some ways to avoid scams: talk to your insurance company before signing an AOB, or talk to somebody else. I mean, I don't generally recommend signing an AOB. At least I know we only get the cases where they go bad, but I've never seen anything good coming out of an AOB. I'm sure there are situations where that makes sense, but I think it would have to be with somebody who's very sophisticated, and fully understands what they're doing and has a very specific reason for wanting to assign their benefits. But generally, I find that people are much better off negotiating with their insurance companies directly rather than just turning it over and not participating in the process. Make sure the contractors are licensed. It really protects you and really ensures that there's going to be a quality of work, hopefully, that will be performed on the house that may not otherwise be present. As with everything in life, get everything in writing. If they're gonna, I can't tell you how many complaints we had where people said, they told me they could do this for $5,000 and then I got a bill and it was $30,000. And we said, well, did they ever put that in writing? No, but he looked so nice. I mean, I didn't think he was gonna lie to me. And so, really be suspicious, really make sure that you get everything in writing. We also saw a large number of complaints where people didn't even know who they gave their money to. They saw a sign on the side of the truck, but they didn't have a business card, they didn't have a contract. I mean, we really, we had Joe. That's who they gave the money to, was Joe. And, there's just not much we can do when we don't even know who these people are. And it's really unfortunate that anybody would go in and take advantage of these consumers, but I think we all know that it happens in spades. Kathy, was there a question?
Yeah, a comment. We have a person who has some adjusting experience, and she said from an adjusting background, assignment of benefits are the devil in 99% of the claims, 99%.
Yeah. I'm trying to give some benefit of doubt, but I think probably most people would agree with that, which is why the legislature saw fit to really restrict the scenarios where you're going to be able to use those. So you want to get everything in writing, including the contract. The most of the complaints that we received, there were no contracts. It really was just, it was negotiated through text or through email or phone calls. And again, I know it's an overwhelming time, but you are still hiring somebody to do something. You still want to make sure that you get that contract. And if they don't have contracts, that's a red flag. I mean, any licensed, legitimate contractor should regularly have contracts that spell out what the payment schedule is going to be, what the scope of work is that's going to be done, because we saw that a lot too. People would say, oh, he was going to come in and take out the cabinets, redo the floor, and fix the roof. And they only fixed the roof. And but there's nothing in writing showing what the scope of work was that they agreed to. And that's really difficult to prove. And then don't pay everything up front. There was a lot of people who got their FEMA money and the contract, it's kind of like when you buy a car, you don't go in and say, I've got $20,000 to spend. They're going to find you a $20,000 car. Same thing with a contractor. If you say, look, I got $30,000 from FEMA, they'll say, all right, I can do this for $30,000, even though it really may only be $20,000 worth of work. And so typically with a legitimate contractor, you're not paying everything up front. It's usually draws. They do 10% of the work, you give them 10% of the money. They do 20% of the work, you give them 20% of the money. The money comes as they're doing the work. And I don't think it's unusual to see a certain amount of money having to go up front, especially if they have to buy the materials and things like that, but they shouldn't get all of it up front. That's kind of how you make sure they keep coming back, which frankly, a lot of them just didn't. Even when they were being paid in installments, a lot of them just gave up and quit the job halfway through. And that kind of left the consumer high and dry as well. And then you can also file a complaint with the appropriate agency. I've got the acronyms here, but we're going to go through these in more detail. So the Department of Financial Services, DFS, they're the ones that regulate insurance. And they also, part of that agency is the Office of Financial Regulation, OFR, might be another acronym that you've heard of, and then the Department of Insurance, DOI. So they're going to help you with if your insurance company is not paying out the benefits that you think you're entitled to, they're going to help negotiate, or you can file a complaint with them, and they should reach out to the insurance company to see why the claims are not being paid or any other issues directly with the insurance company. And then the Department of Business and Professional Regulation, DBPR, they're the ones who issue contractor license and roofers, and they're going to regulate any licensed entity or individual. And then the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, We call them DACs, and they regulate charities. So that's another issue that we see, people fundraising for the victims of disasters, but not maybe being a legitimate charity. So DACs will regulate that. They also regulate travel agencies, but that's another repository where consumers can file complaints. And DACs and the AG, we regularly share complaints. So even if somebody files with DACs, we might be able to, we will see those complaints and vice versa as well. Kathy? Any questions?
No.
Okay. So I thought I would test how well you have been paying attention so far and just kind of give you some hypothetical complaints that we might see in our office. And I'll warn you, I used to be a law professor, so these might read more like law school exams where there's multiple issues and you have to issue spot and everything. But take a moment and read through the facts of this one. So we have a consumer who lost the roof to her house in a hurricane, and she was charged $5,000 to tarp 2,000 square feet of her house. The roofer offers to repair her roof for whatever her insurance company will pay. Tells her not to worry about it, we'll deal just directly with the insurance company. And then the roofer did a poor job and the roof leaked after the repair was done. All right, Carlin, can we have our next poll, please? So these are your options. Do you see price gouging here? Do you not see price gouging? Do you see unfair and deceptive trade practices and price gouging, or just unfair and deceptive trade practices but not price gouging? Or you're just not sure? All right, Carlin, what kind of results did we get? All right, so we're seeing unfair and deceptive trade practices and price gouging is the most popular. Nobody selected not price gouging, so there's probably something going on here. And the not sures, I respect that. I think that that's a very, very fair answer. All right, so let's talk through some of this. So the fact that she was charged $5,000 for a 2,000 square foot house, that kind of raises my eyebrows a little bit, because typically what we see in the industry is about $1 per square foot is normally what we see most tarpers charging in the industry. However, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's an incredibly steeply pitched house. So, you know, maybe it's there are things about this house that are very difficult or very technical, or they had to bring in special machinery or things to be able to get the tarp on this house. I would also be curious, did they literally tarp every square foot of the roof, or was it just a portion of the roof that needed the tarp? I'm also concerned that the roofer is not giving a hard price, is just saying, we'll do it for whatever the insurance company will pay. Because typically what we see is, you know, maybe the insurance company will only cover $20,000 and it ends up being more than that to repair the roof. And so then they end up coming back to the consumer for the difference, even though that's not what they agreed to. Another thing that concerns me is that most people have a deductible on their insurance policy. And so it is a misdemeanor for the roofer to pay the deductible or to not pay the deductible. So there's an issue there. The homeowner should still have to pay the deductible before the insurance kicks in, and that is the homeowner's responsibility, not something that the roofer can take on. And so I think the homeowner should at least be informed about what the deductible is and what her portion of that she might be responsible for before the roofer puts his portion on top of that. And so we do have some potential price gouging here, but I would need to know a little bit more about what it is. And that would be the price that was charged for the actual tarping. I think the last two issues, those raise more unfair and deceptive trade practices for me, concerns for me. You know, the fact that he did a poor job and that it leaked, you know, that may be a DBPR issue. That might be a potential unfair and deceptive trade practices issue. We would need to dig into that a little bit more and see maybe if there's a legitimate reason why the quality of the work wasn't done correctly, or maybe there was some other extenuating circumstance.
One question, Laura.
Yes.
What if a homeowner has an issue with the DEO, Department of Economic Opportunity, Rebuild Florida home repair contractor?
I have not dealt with that issue before, so I don't know. I've never seen one of those complaints come through our office, so I wish I had some insight, but I don't know that one.
But if they did, they could, if that's the case, they could still file a complaint with the AG's office to see,
Absolutely.
or DBPR, to check it out as well.
Yes, you can always file a complaint, and we will always take a look at it, whether it's actionable or we can do something about it. I mean, that would depend, but yes. Okay, here's another one. So we've got a consumer who stops to fill up her gas tank before the storm hits. The station's charging $3.69 a gallon. So I drafted this PowerPoint back in March when I thought we were actually going to have the conference then. And so obviously this is extraordinarily high now. So maybe make it $2.69, even that's high for this market right now. But other stations in the area were charging $3.29. And the station is out of regular gas. So on her way home, she also passes somebody on the side of the road selling generators for $1,000. All right, Carlin, can we do our next poll? So same options: price gouging, not price gouging, FDUPTA and price gouging, or not FDUPTA, or it is FDUPTA but not price gouging, or you're still not sure. All right, let's see what our results are. All right, so definitely seeing price gouging, maybe not unfair and deceptive. Okay. So some things I would want to know about the gas. You know, we often see this in storms, that the gas station will quickly run out of regular, the cheapest gas that's available. And then all that's available is the mid-grade and the premium. And that's not price gouging. So as long as they haven't increased the prices and they just have run out of the cheapest option, that's not necessarily actionable. So what I would need to know is the $3.69 a gallon, is that the regular price of gas, or is that the mid-grade or premium price of gas that the consumer only had the options to buy the more expensive type of gas? And we often see consumers, you know, obviously they're very stressed. They get confused about which grade, or they might have accidentally hit the mid-grade or premium button instead of the regular button, and that explains the increase in the price. But we would also then want to get the historical pricing records for the gas station. So again, we go back 30 days. What's the price that you've been charging for this grade of gas in the 30 days before the storm? And there are just some gas stations in the state that are always charging more than everybody else. And they are located near Disney. They're located near airports. They're located in other places where consumers generally are willing to pay more because the location is at a premium. And so, you know, if it wasn't an increase that happened as a result of the storm, it may not be actionable. We would still look at it. We would still want to get those the pricing records to see what their prices have been historically. But the price alone doesn't necessarily tell us whether there was price gouging or not. Now, the person selling generators on the side of the road, another thing that I've learned since I've started doing price gouging is how much generators cost, and the wide variety of generators that are available out there. So, I mean, you can buy generators anywhere from around $500 up to several $1,000s. And it really just depends, you know, is it a pull start? Is it an automatic start? Is it gas? Is it, well, I think they're all gas, but there's a lot of different features and functions. And so probably my biggest concern with the person selling it on the side of the road, I'm pretty sure that this person does not have a business license and is probably not permitted to be setting up shop on the side of the road. And so we will often call law enforcement and ask them to go out and talk to the person if they're still there once we get the complaint. And if they do manage to sell a generator, or they even have it available for sale still, we will then ask for their purchase records. Okay, show us how much you bought this generator for. You know, you can have a profit off of it, but we would have to look at, you know, what is the market price? You know, what are Lowe's and Home Depot buying this generator for? And then how much are they marking it up? And then how much did this person mark it up? And is that reasonable or not? And we will sometimes see people who have a generator and they do just want to help out, and so they are just selling it at cost, what it cost them, you know, or maybe for an extra $50 for whatever it cost them to get it to wherever they were going, or to get it to the side of the road. But clearly not very safe to be selling stuff on the side of the road, nor are they probably licensed. So that's probably, there's a potential price gouging issue there, but it's also an unfair and deceptive trade practices concern for me as well. I know we've only got about 5 minutes left, so I've got a couple more hypotheticals, but I did want to stop and see if there were any other questions or thoughts or comments or anything else I can answer.
No more questions or comments at this point.
Okay, then I'm going to skip to, we had another hurricane one, but I'm going to skip to a COVID one. So this time we've got a consumer who made a reservation for a beach house. She made the reservation in February for a stay in May. And so in preparation for her upcoming trip in March, she started buying masks and hand sanitizer so that she would be safe when she goes to her beach house. And she paid $5 for a bottle of sanitizer and $5 a piece for each mask that she bought. And then after she buys those products, she gets a call from the rental company, and they tell her that there's a travel ban in the state of Florida. You're not allowed to travel. We're canceling your reservation, but we will give you a year to use as a credit for the money that you spent for your reservation, but we will not give you a cash refund. All right, Carlin, can we pull up our poll? Same options as before. All right, let's see what our results are. So no price gouging is the most popular answer. Maybe a little bit of unfair and deceptive. Okay, so I would probably tend to agree with that. So we have seen and continue to see hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of complaints from people who made travel reservations in Florida, and then the travel ban went into effect. And that is not price gouging, because vacations are not an essential commodity, but that is potentially unfair and deceptive. I can tell you almost every single contract that I've seen that people have signed with VRBO, Airbnb, it says non-refundable deposit. It says once you've paid, it is non-refundable. And so arguably these companies would be within their right to not even offer a credit, to just say, sorry, it wasn't our fault that this was canceled. And the consumers say, well, but it wasn't our fault either. It's frankly something that almost no contract ever contemplated would happen in this particular situation. And so then you look at issues like force majeure and other contract offenses that might come into play, but probably not unfair or deceptive. It's really a contract issue. But I will say that every complaint that we got, we send it on to the company for a response. And the vast majority of them have either issued partial refunds, have issued full credits and say, you know, look, you have a year, you have 2 years, you can rebook this trip. We'll do it again sometime in the future, or we'll give full refunds. It really just kind of depends. And so it does seem as though the companies are trying hard to stay viable and stay in business, but also try to, you know, make some amends with the consumers for the difficulty. On the hand sanitizer and the masks, we just don't know. I mean, it just depends. How big was the hand sanitizer? Was it medical grade? Was it, was it something? We've seen designer hand sanitizer where they had the personal logo of the business on them. They were scented with a special scent. So those are all factors that we look into and say, okay, well, how big was it, and how much did you pay for it? Because the prices have really shifted a lot. In March and April, hand sanitizer and masks were a lot more expensive than they are now because they were in much greater demand. We had a shorter supply. Now I feel like I can't go anywhere without seeing masks and hand sanitizers for sale. And the masks, it depends. I mean, is it one of the thin blue paper ones? Is it a handmade one? Is it an N95 mask? So we track all of those price points and compare it to the data to see, is this within the realm of what's typical given the specifications of that specific product. So in true lawyerly fashion, the answer is it depends. But probably, I would agree with the majority of the respondents. I'm not seeing probably any price gouging here. All right, the last thing I have is just contact.
One more question before you go there, and it goes back to the issue spotting for number 2 with the gas price and the generator. Wanting to know is there a definitive answer to that one about whether it's price gouging or?
It is not a definitive answer because I don't have enough information yet. So what we would have to do is contact the gas station to find out what their prices were and what they've been over the past 30 days. And then the generator, I would need to know how much they bought the generator for and how much they're marking it up for and what kind of generator it is. So there's possibility that there's price gouging going on there, but I would need more information. Those are the kinds of things we're looking for.
All right, let me see. I think we have a couple more questions. They saw number 3, which I don't think you went through, and they're wondering what the answer is to number 3.
Let's see. Okay, so she stopped and bought a case of water for, hold on,
$10.
Oh, for $10. Okay, and then a hotel reservation. So the issues I think here are, what kind of water is it? Is it, the high-end specialty water, or is it just, your regular Aquafina water? How many bottles are in the case? How big are the bottles? Are these 10-ounce bottles? Are these 20-ounce bottles? Does this store typically sell water, and do they normally sell it just per bottle, which is what we see a lot of convenience stores do, sell it by the bottle, and then somebody comes in and says, I want a case. And so if the water normally sells for $1.25 and they say, I want a case of 20, well, that's going to be really expensive. And they're going to say, well, I can go to Walmart and buy the same thing for $5. And it's like, well, maybe you could, but I doubt it would be the same water. It probably wouldn't be the same brand, and it wouldn't be the same size. But that's the difference. I mean, we typically see a markup at convenience stores because they're there for convenience, as opposed to going to a big box store where things might be cheaper but might be less convenient as well. And then with the hotel, typically we see hotel rates increase for weekends and holidays, right? So it's a Friday night is normally going to be more expensive than a Thursday night, but it depends. So again, we would ask the hotel, give us your pricing records for the past 30 days. Let's see what you typically charge on a Friday night. Is that a typical price that you charge for this particular type of room? Is it a single room? Is it a double? Is it a king size? These are all the factors that we're going to take into consideration. And then, with Hurricane Michael, it hit on a holiday weekend when there was a home football game scheduled. So we saw hotel prices all over the place because they were normally already priced much higher than the market because of the high demand and the special event that was in place. So those are factors that we look at and take into consideration as well.
All right. Well, so would you say the best thing for people to do is if they just have a question to file a complaint or call your consumer complaint line?
Yes, absolutely. So you can always call, you can always send me an email If you have a question, I'm happy to answer that. Or if you would like to connect with the bureau chief or the office, the AG office in your area, I'm happy to put you in touch with the people in that particular office. But for your clients or any other consumers that you come in contact with, yes, please encourage them to file complaints with our office if they are seeing any concerning patterns, any concerning issues. It may or may not be price gouging, but we would rather take a look at it and know for sure than to not know about it at all.
Okay, well, I don't see any more questions or comments in the chat. So that'll wrap up this webinar. Laura, thank you so much for presenting today. And thanks to all of the people who joined us today, and come back next Thursday at noon Eastern Time. Our presentation next week is Homeowners After a Disaster. We have Alice Cohen from the National Consumer Law Center and Lynn Drysdale with Jacksonville Area Legal Aid. So again, thanks for joining. Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Carlin. And I'll see y'all next week. Bye now.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye-bye.